Our next speaker is Louis J. Freeh, who was the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, from 1993 to 2001. He served previously as an FBI special agent from 1975 to 1981 in the New York City field office and at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. In 1981, he joined the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. Subsequently, he held positions there as Chief of the Organized Crime Unit, Deputy United States Attorney, and Associate United States Attorney. Please join me in welcoming Louis J. Freeh.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mitch, and thank you, the organization from Northern California, for sponsoring this very important forum. And it's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. You've been an incredible audience, so let me just compliment you. The governor and I calculated we have 8 minutes between us, so I don't think I can do it in 4, but I'll try to do it as quickly as I can. It's a very important moment, and I share the word that General Conway used, which is the urgency of the moment. I was just in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure some of you have seen it, the wartime bunker of Winston Churchill, and his words, never, never, never surrender. And I want to compliment you and your colleagues, Mrs. Rajavi, and the hundreds of people that will watch this, particularly the residents and victims in Camp Ashraf. And you are leading the fight for freedom in Iran, just as our military forces fight for freedom on the battlefields. You fight in a much more difficult and much more dangerous place. And we compliment you on your bravery. We offer our condolences for your sacrifices, but we offer you our encouragement. Churchill also said once that the Americans could be counted upon to do the right thing in the end after they've exhausted every other possibility. Well, that's what I wanted to talk about a little bit today, briefly, if I might. My association with this issue really goes back to 1996, the Khobar bombing, which you remember took place in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. At about that time, there was a change of policy in the administration, an appropriate one, and the idea was that there was a new moderate president recently installed in Tehran, and the United States would take serious efforts to develop that relationship, a perfectly valid foreign policy choice. And we began to get, in the FBI, directions in that regard, which we accepted. For instance, I got a call one day from the Secretary of State complaining that the FBI was photographing and fingerprinting the Iranian wrestlers who were coming into the United States. And I was asked, why are you doing that? The Iranians are complaining. And I said, well, the reason we're doing that is on these teams, there's usually an MOIS agent. It's the wrestler that looks a little bit out of shape. And by taking the photograph and fingerprint, we keep them demotivated from coming into the United States, where, by the way, they work a network of clandestine agents who are still very active in the United States. And then Khobar Towers happened. 19 Americans were killed. General Shelton, you and I sat in on meetings around this town in the aftermath of that. And we conducted an investigation where police officers were investigators. We're not politicians, we're not diplomats. And very quickly into the investigation, it became clear that although the attack was operationally performed by the Hezbollah in Saudi Arabia, the attack was organized, planned, funded, and executed by the IRGC. They had gotten the passports for the operators. They had funded them with cash. The general in the IRGC, who was in charge of the project, sat in the embassy, the Iranian embassy in Damascus, and gave them their passports. So we took all this information, this is 1996, now into 1997, and we presented it to the administration. I actually presented it to the National Security Advisor. And his reaction, I got a lot of different reactions around town the 9 years I was director. This was perhaps the most interesting one. When I told him that the IRGC and the Iranian government had murdered 19 Americans in the bombing at Khobar, his response was, well, who else knows about this? And I said, well, several dozen FBI agents, the Attorney General of the United States, and I think we should move to the U.S. Attorney's Office and procure an indictment. That was not on the agenda, and I respect that. Again, the issue was to try to develop a relationship with this regime. It didn't work, obviously, and in 1997, the MEK was put on the Foreign Terrorist Organization list at the request of the Iranian government and to appease the Iranian government. That bad decision has persisted for 14 years. In the Bush administration, and I have many friends in both administrations, I served in one, obviously, actually I served in two, technically, the offer came, again, to the United States government that the Iranian regime would control the operational use of improvised explosive devices in Iraq, and American soldiers, American service men and women would be protected. And that sounded like a really good idea, so we kept them on the list for another bunch of years. That obviously did not happen either. And as one of my colleagues said, more Americans killed in June of this year than last year, precisely as a result of this IED operation run by the Iranian regime. So the United States has not gotten a very good bargain in 14 years. And this group is not a terrorist group. As my colleagues have said, the MEK, the PMOI, however you want to define them, is not a terrorist group. Do you think for a moment that the likes of the people on this panel would be here if there was even a remote possibility that this organization was a foreign terrorist organization? By the way, we all keep contacts with our associations and our agencies. No one has come up to me or any of my colleagues from their current agencies and said, I don't think you should be doing this. This is a bad organization. This is an organization that has terrorist intent or capability. That's not happened. No one, as far as I know, my colleagues also, we've not been notified by the Department of Justice that we are suspected of providing material assistance to a foreign terrorist organization. The reason is it's not a foreign terrorist organization except by the virtue of this bad decision that listed it and persisted. On the urgency issue, which is the second point I want to make, we are running substantially out of time here. I don't believe and I don't have confidence in the State Department process. In fact, I would not even call it a process. And my hope is that the people in the State Department who are working this issue, working is not the right word, would pay some attention to the words of our new Secretary of Defense who recently said, damn it, make a decision. The decision here this is not a complicated legal or factual issue. I've looked at all the facts that the State Department, at least, has agreed to provide. And the court, which is, by the way, 1 year ago today, the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia found that the Department of State had violated the constitutional due process rights of the MEK. Violated the constitutional due process rights because they engaged in a legal and fact-finding process that did not verify the credibility of its sources, did not provide the information to the plaintiff, the MEK, to respond to, and sent it back to the Department of State and said, you have to do it again. What's been going on for that year is an absolute legal disgrace. Absolute legal disgrace. I used to do this for a living. I used to be on one side of the bench. For a while, I actually sat on the bench. The Court of Appeals specifically directed the Secretary of State to review the decision and report back to the court. They have well surpassed any semblance of regularity or due process in that review. And I think the review borders now on bad faith, my opinion. If I was a judge, which I'm not, and unfortunately this is before no judge at the moment, because the Court of Appeals, which is not a trial judge, sent it back to the administrative agency for a review. If this was before a trial judge, ladies and gentlemen, that judge would haul the State Department into a hearing, into a show cause hearing, why it should not be held in contempt of the court for delaying, without any justified basis, the completion of the court's direction. And the evidence of that is fairly obvious. Lawyers, we look at facts. One of my colleagues said, you've got a lot of papers here in front of you. I do. We spend a lot of time on the facts. Let me just mention a couple of them.
Hold them up.
The State Department is going through a process now. It's not a process. It's a slow walk to nowhere, which is intended to frustrate the litigants and defy the order of the court. So what they do now, it's not a very complicated description. What they do is they assemble a bunch of documents. There's 10 of them here in front of me. I'm not going to take the time to go over them with you. Then they give them to the plaintiff. They give them to the MEK and their lawyers, and they say, comment on these. And they comment on them, and then they say, thank you for your comments. We now have to review your comments. And the clock ticks, and nothing happens, but the importance is the irrelevance